Protas is the chairman of the International Commission of Jurists Kenya chapter. Good morning, Protas.
Good morning.
Karibu sana to Kenya's biggest conversation,
Thank
the
you.
Situation Room.
Thank you.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
What is it?
I was checking
It was actually
temperature.
hot.
You can't leave.
Okay.
Once you come in,
Yes.
Lepet is at the door. Can't leave.
Happy to be here.
Tell us about ICJ Kenya.
Yeah. ICJ Kenya is first stands for International Commission of Jurists. It's a membership-based organization formed in 1959, and it is based on the International Commission of Jurists, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland. But it's an autonomous organization, ICJ Kenya. It's the only autonomous branch of ICJ worldwide. And ICJ is main objectives is to promote human rights, and that is under 4 pillars. One is democratic governance and rule of law. Then we have the human rights itself. We have economic justice, and then institutional well-being. That's how we do. Yes.
So one of the things that you do is to promote human rights.
Yes.
Now, you know, when you talk about human rights, people come up with human rights from various angles, okay? So in that decade of the 80s and into the 90s and
Yes.
then into 2000,
Yes.
human rights was going hand in hand with political agitation, change of government and all, right?
Yes.
Organizations such as ICJ, such as the Kenya Human Rights Commission, were out there agitating for change of governance and all.
Yes.
Is that human rights? How do you define human rights? What is human rights?
Human rights is where you have everybody, regardless of their stand, their belief, their religion, their race, their color, enjoying the same kind of treatment or rights that any human being should get. So that is what I would put it in a nutshell. Yes.
What would you say if you were to do, I mean, oftentimes when we talk about certain things, it's then necessary for us to look at the big picture,
Yes.
you know, to understand what the status of things is at the moment. It seems sometimes a buzzword that we like to throw at things, or, you know, we're not defending human rights, or yes, we actually are defending human rights, or, you know, a country that can be great with its economy and development then also is, you know, scoring under when it comes to its human rights profile. All right.
Yes.
Let's look at Kenya.
Yes.
Specifically, and even as we start to celebrate this tomorrow or to commemorate the day,
Yes.
what would you say the footprint of representation of justice for human rights or injustice for human rights? What does it look like for Kenya?
Before I go into that, there's something you have just mentioned, the International Human Rights Day. I'm sure you have already mentioned that it's we are celebrating it tomorrow. And just for information, the reason it is celebrated on 10th of December, that's the day that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was actually passed. And when you look at it from the Kenyan perspective, over the years, what we have been looking at as injustice and what you're fighting for is not the same. There's a time when certain freedoms or certain rights were not available. And through those years, you mentioned the 80s and the 90s, the human rights defenders, I would call them as such, which ICJ is one of them, were fighting then for freedom of association, freedom of information, the arbitrary arrests and fight for justice for people who are accused of different offences. There are times you'd find there was no proper follow on the rule of law. So if somebody is accused of something, sometimes when it is not even an actual offence, there would be some sort of summary justice which would not follow the rule of law. Come to the new millennium 2000, there is a change in terms of how governance was in the country. We came to multi-party era, and then that space changed a bit. And now we are up to the 2010. There was a fight for change of the constitution, which we had since independence. And there are more rights that came with that new constitution. So right now where we are, there are certain rights, human rights, which we enjoy, which were not there. But I would say we're not out of the woods, because there are still issues that we need to address. And which ICJ Kenya is actively involved in following up. And one of the key ones I would mention probably is, which is live, I think, in public domain, extrajudicial killings. There's also access to information, which I must say ICJ Kenya was at the forefront in fighting for the passing of the Act, Access to Information Act in 2016. That is something ICJ had really fought for over 10 years. Yes.
Chapter 4 of the Constitution.
Yes.
People said, Chapter 4 of Kenya's Constitution is a case study on constitutionalism and constitution making globally.
Yes.
It talks about Bill of Rights,
yes,
and then goes down to break down those rights. Very many of them. Right to, let me read some. Right to life, equality, yes, and freedom from discrimination, human dignity, freedom and security of the person. You've talked about freedom of the media, expression, access to information, association, assembly, all those many rights. And then some of them are said to be automatic rights. Some of them are said to be rights that you shall realize progressively.
yes.
How do you break those down? I mean, which ones are these that are to be realized progressively, and how progressive is this progression? It's been 10 years down the road. Should we be enjoying like 80% or 90% of the rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution?
Yes, I agree with you. There are some which, as just being a human being, you should enjoy. The right to life, that is there. We do enjoy that in Kenya, but as I've mentioned in my previous statement, there are times when you find life is taken arbitrarily, and usually it is by state or state actors, sometimes security forces. The issue of extrajudicial killings, that is something that we still need to work on. Right to life should be not something that you need to fight for. It should come automatically, in my view. The others you've mentioned, freedom to associate, freedom of speech. As I've said, over the years, there's been tremendous development. We're able to say things which we could not say before. But we still need to guard that space and agitate for more. It should not be that because you have expressed your views and they're seen to not be favorable to particular entities or the state, then you should be oppressed. Everyone should have that freedom. There's a freedom of the media, and I think that is also something that is has progressed over the years. We have had some dark faces, and I think even after we got multi-party democracy and there was a new era when NA came into power, we still had some dark episodes when media was attacked, and in my view, that should not be at this stage. We have had instances where journalists have also been attacked as recent as maybe a month or two back. In my view, that should also not be happening now. The ones which would say progressive, there's the inclusivity aspect. We have had this agitation of women being included, or the gender, two-third gender rule. You'd extrapolate it to rights, gender rights. That was supposed to be progressive. Of course, over the years, because of different personal partisan interests, it has taken some time to achieve that. But I'm happy to see that there's some progress in that, and some institutions now deliberately make sure that the two-third gender rule is followed. So that's amongst the progressive ones, yes.
When you say progressive, okay, on the gender one, there was even a division in the Supreme Court on whether this should be a progressive right or a traumatic right. Of course, we know Chief Justice Emeritus Professor William Mutunga said progressive what should be immediate, and the other judges disagreed. But how, when you say progressive, back to that question, should we have a timeline for by when should this be progressive? Should there be a sunset clause? Yes, these are progressive rights, but by this time we should have achieved this.
Yes.
And what is that? What is that timeline?
I agree with you. I actually think there should be a timeline, and in my view, from 2010, 10 years was sufficient time. We have had we had the first general election 2013 after the new constitution. Yeah. And I think with that regime, there should have been a push towards achievement of that. So by 2017, in my view, we should have been there or almost there. So 10 years from 2010 should have been. So right now, I would say probably we are behind schedule. In my view.
When you said there, what would it look like? How would we know we've arrived? What do we need to see so that when I look out at the window, I say, okay, see, we have achieved it. We are there.
When you look at our institutions and you don't start questioning why we have one gender overwhelming, especially public institutions, you find that 90% or 100% is from one gender, where you find somebody has to run to court to tell the court that, look, this list that has been provided is more than two-thirds. When we don't see that at all, then no, we have reached.
I would have been of the opinion that the fact that people run to court is there because the frequency with which people go to court, some of the court rulings, the number of times the government itself has been censured, I would think that this is what now would herald that new beginning. Because even in countries where the there has been reached, human nature tends to go against some of these norms that we would like to idealize. And the fact that there's an understanding that this is not a fight that actually, you never actually come to an end. You're always fighting new fronts. Again, I would have assumed that that would have been the there, meaning the fact that that space has been opened and this can happen.
Yes.
The pushback is always there, and it's a constant.
Actually, very true. I think it's something else forgot to mention, the freedoms we have in the judiciary, that you can go to court and you can get an order against the government of the day, is actually something to celebrate. There's a time when that will not be there. But I agree with you. When we get to that stage where you can go to court and the court agrees with you and says, yes, there's been a violation here, this needs to be corrected. It is true. And I'm happy to say that as ICJ Kenya, we have worked with the Judiciary, one of our pillars on democratic governance and rule of law. One of them is strengthening the judiciary within Kenya and the region. We actually partner with the Magistrates and Judges Association in Kenya and also the Region 1. And I must say that even our members, some of them are drawn from the bench. And having a space where the courts can express themselves independently is a key thing, yes.
There's Article 43,
Yes.
the economic and social rights. Are those progressive rights or are those automatic rights? This is right to accessing food, right to accessing the highest attainable standards of health, accessible and adequate housing, freedom from hunger, having adequate food of acceptable quality, clean and safe water and adequate quantities. Are those progressive?
There are those which are basic, which should be automatic. I think that one of food, water should be basic. As citizens, we have a contract with our government, and we have elected the government. In turn, the government is supposed to provide for the citizens food, water, that should be basic. Health should also be there. But I know there is a push for universal health care. Maybe that may be progressive to achieve the universal health care. And I think that one should also have a timeline. We should also look at that.
Okay. Now, in the absence of these rights being upheld, so there's a contract between a government and its people that certain rights will be upheld. Now, that right comes alive through the provision of certain things. Now, in the absence of this provision, in the absence of this, can you say upholdness? In the absence,
okay.
This is a safe space. We can make up things. After all, leopard is leopard. So, in the absence, what then is the course of action? It doesn't happen. People are hungry. There's no clean water. There is no 1, 2, 3. What recourse then do people take when human rights are being abrogated, intentionally or otherwise?
I think we should have actually agitation and interventions, probably lobbying, and put government on the spot, because this should be highlighted, and government should be told that where we are now as a country, as an economy, we should not be having this group of people going without food, going without water. And there are various interventions. There's one of even probably going to court, but I believe that the lobbying and putting the government institutions, maybe direct engagement with the relevant institutions in government should actually be happening, and the government needs to address that and say what they're doing to ensure that everyone has food and water.
Let's take a break at 9:30.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Latif Ndu Oko, CT Muga, and Protas Saende, the chairman of ICJ Kenya. As we prepare to celebrate Human Rights Day tomorrow, we are talking about the journey that Kenya has made towards the realization of human rights. You're saying, Protas, that yes, a lot more agitation needs to happen on those rights that should be realized by now, where there should be clear direction on where we're going to realize that. Now, many of the people who are in positions of authority are jurists. The Attorney General is a jurist. The Speaker of any of the two houses is a jurist. The Chief Justice is a jurist. People who should be in positions where they are ensuring that these rights are actually being realized. All right. We even have constitutional commissions where many of them, the chairpersons, should be jurists. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights is in office, which has jurists. And then there's ICJ, which is there and it has a whip. What do you do to whip those people who are jurists, who understand your language, towards moving in that direction?
Thank you. Actually, as I said, we draw our membership from across the bench and the bar. So we do have members who, and in some of those institutions, and there are times when agitation for those rights, and especially in the era we came from, called for mass action or for protests and demonstrations. There are times when it calls for diplomacy and lobbying. And we have partner institutions. We have partnered with different institutions. We have, depending on the objective that we want to achieve. So we have reached out to some of these institutions. We have reached out to government. There are certain areas we have worked with the government. At times we have worked with Judiciary, including even in this last preparation for the general elections. We did quite a bit of training for Judiciary in terms of handling electoral dispute resolution, for Access to Information Act. We did lobby Parliament on a number of occasions, and I can tell you, even before that act was passed, there are times when the Parliament would be prorogued, when its term would come to an end, and you find that bill collapses, and then a new lot comes in. So there are times when we would lobby, even lawmakers, depending on what you want to achieve. Other ways we do that is also recognizing outstanding jurists, people who in these institutions have fought for human rights, democratic governance, or rule of law. We recognize them and celebrate them. And our way as ICJ Kenya of celebrating the International Human Rights Day, or the UN Human Rights Day, is by holding an annual Jurists of the Year award ceremony, where we identify through an independent committee, which keeps changing every year, every 2 years for now, which identifies a jurist who has stood out, and on this day, to commemorate the International Human Rights Day, we have an award ceremony. And because the 10th of December falls on Saturday, we usually, if it falls on a day when it's not a working day, we hold it on the day before. So today we are having one such ceremony where we'll award the Jurist of the Year identified for this year by the committee. So that also encourages the different jurists who are able or in a position of influence to do something so that we move the needle, so that we get to achieve the rights that we are agitating for.
So I get that. Spotlighting those that are doing what ought to be done.
Yes.
Should you also not just also at the same time be calling out those that are not? Because I want to put it to you, the biggest impediments to the realization of these rights that you're talking about, that ICJ stands for, are jurists.
Yes.
If you look at Parliament, we haven't achieved this. The Speaker is a jurist. The chairperson of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee in Parliament is a jurist. Senate, same. Attorney General, jurist. Commission on Administration of Justice, jurist. Human Rights Commission, jurist. Director of Public Prosecution, jurist. And all these people, when you talk about not realizing these rights, they're the ones who are sitting in those positions of authority.
That should be realizing the rights.
That should be realizing the rights. So should you not also be calling them out and saying, come on, you've had 8 years, you've had 4 years, you've had 2 years in this office, and we haven't felt you moving towards achieving what we have in the Constitution?
Yes, I agree with you. And at times we do that. And there are times when also when the actions we find are going against the achievement of these objectives of achieving the human rights as we envisage. We have also gone to court or supported public interest litigation to challenge some of the decisions made which are counter the progression or which violate human rights. We have gone to court either directly as ICJ, or we have supported partner organizations or individuals to file such public interest litigation. There are quite a number. I may mention a few arising from the 2007-2008 post-election violence. There was a lot of violence, gender-based violence, and even when everything was settled in terms of the governance aspect, the government, the parties, the actors had reconciled. That aspect was not being addressed, and we found that there was quite a bit of gender-based violence, which was being carried out largely by state actors, apart from other individuals. And there was a case that was filed, a petition that had been there to agitate on rights and asking the government to recognize such things. Even when government fails to act, like in the appointment of judges, we are also involved in probably agitation of that. And there were some court cases, I think ourselves and our partners, we were involved. So yes, we do call them out, and at times we even go to court to seek orders to challenge.
Do you think, or do you feel that Kenyans, citizens, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be Kenya, but citizens, do you feel that they are aware of their rights to comfortable levels, and then to levels comfortable enough to seek a course of action in case these rights are abrogated?
Not really. You will find there is a large majority of Kenyans who are not aware of their rights. Granted, progressively over the years, you find there's a lot more awareness, and this may also be reflected in the more and more people who are seeking court intervention when their rights have been violated. But there's still a part of Kenyans who are not aware and do not know what to do. They may not even know that their right is being violated, but even when they do, they may not know what to do about that. And as ICJ Kenya, on the part of democratic governance and also the economic social justice rights, we do support paralegal networks, and we have a countrywide system where we have paralegals who are empowered to actually reach out to the people in the rural areas who may not have access to maybe formal systems where they may be made aware of their rights. So we have, with our partners, we have carry out trainings for these paralegal networks, and they in turn now empower the people at the grassroots. We have also agitated for legal aid. The Legal Aid Act is one of the instruments that we have really pushed for. And there's also the costs of access to justice is something that we also have been at the forefront pushing for a reduction on the access to justice, or making access to justice easier. And on that arm, we have also worked on alternative justice systems, and this one we have worked with the government and the judiciary. There's actually a a committee that for alternative justice systems, of which you are part of, where you try to provide different avenues to ensure that even the person at the grassroots has access to justice in the most basic form.
Remind me again, what exactly is the mandate
Yes.
for ICJ?
ICJ is to ensure that we have a just and equitable society. Yes, and in that, human rights is the forefront.
Okay. 60% of the population of the people who are in jail in our prisons
Yes.
are serving an under 3-year term.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
30% are below, serving a term below 1 year. The majority of these people are there because they do not have access to legal aid.
Yes.
We have a Legal Aid Act in Kenya which is not funded.
Yes.
We don't have anything that we can refer to as an office of a public defender. Okay. Now, you have mentioned that you have pushed for it, you have lobbied, and yet, if the majority of our people, as we say, the vast majority of our people live on a subsistence of something like 6,000 shillings a month, which works to 200 shillings a day, the vast majority, they will not have any excess money to afford legal services. Yet the ICJ exists. So do many other institutions that say they champion the cause of the downtrodden, and these are the downtrodden. Now, the offices that would guarantee that this service is actually available to them isn't funded in this country, and yet we have an act. The Office of the Public Defender, does it exist?
No, we don't have.
Exactly. So, when we are talking about access to justice, which is a fundamental right of the citizens, how then, I'm going to ask a difficult question here and take it in the spirit in which it's intended. How then can we take associations like yours seriously and other legal institutions in this country when the very service that the downtrodden need is not in existence, and where it's in existence, it doesn't have the requisite funding for it to actually provide the service that is much needed?
Question well taken. I must say that as ICJ Kenya, yes, we stand for that, just equitable society. But there's so much that we can do.
Yes.
And I can say that in our space, we have done what we can. We are pushing to have more done. And your point on having access to justice to some of the people who may lack that access, and also who may not have proper legal representation, and as for that reason they end up languishing in prison. We have been pushing for that funding so that even the Legal Aid Act, as it is being implemented, we have an office that can actually be well funded and can address the challenges that are there. But there is also another angle to it, and we have been working on that as well. There is a part of decriminalization of petty offences. That's actually something that ICJ Kenya has been working on for a number of years, and not only in Kenya but within the region. There is actually a number of countries where we have been working on, because we realize that across the region you find that there are certain offences which are petty offences, but the people who get to suffer on those petty offences are those marginalized or the poor, the people who may not have a voice or may not have a right. Just because you're poor, you're caught on the wrong side of the law. Maybe you're walking at night outside, you loitering, such offences. And you find, because you do not have access to maybe proper legal services, or you're not aware of your rights, you end up going to prison. Sometimes you may find that the person is not even aware what it is that they are being arrested for. By the time they say, I do not accept, the wheels of justice move, but they move so slowly. By the time the person is getting to be heard, and maybe they are not even heard properly. So maybe they're imprisoned for something which they have not even understood. And that ends up clogging the prisons, the system. So that is something we have been agitating for. And I know there is quite a bit of progress, and I'm hopeful that in the next 1 or 2 years, we should have quite a number of those offences decriminalized, so that we don't have people being arrested and jailed for petty offences.
I'm looking at now these systemic issues. I'm still coming back to the course of action. In the progression, there's an understanding, hopeful understanding. I mean, it may not be complete at any one time, but it could be that, a right that somebody deals with on a daily basis. And I'm seeing it as that probably you're likely to agitate for the rights that, in the absence of, they affect you. The people who do not eat today, without realizing that that is a right. Can we get to the place whereby there's so much attention that is now set on that particular thing that we almost force the system in this way, the government, to do something about it? I think there's a silent lobbying culture in Kenya whereby, there will be a move and it will catch the wave at some point, and then maybe you make some steps. But in terms of a loud lobbying culture whereby it is clear that if this does not happen, the people are standing up tomorrow to say something about it. And I'm really at that point whereby, unfortunately, rights are being tossed out the window, trampled upon day after day, and because it looks as though they're softer rights, and we're not going around and beheading people, but then it has the same effect when you don't feed the population. In terms of doing something about it, or in terms of making the duty bearers, the jurists in these positions, aware that the people for whom these rights ought to be provided, they also know that these things are not being done. They also know that the right environment has not been created. Can we get to that point where it is the people who are taking this responsibility, or even just saying, look, we know that you're not doing this, and we are in a position to essentially remove you? Should you not?
I agree with you. It needs to be louder, and we are partnering with different people. And there's a celebration of this Human Rights Day. There's a 16 days of activism. I'm sure you have talked about it, and with our partners, probably we'll make sure that these particular issues are also given a voice during this activism, but to continue as well with the work that we are doing, because at the end of the day, we will bring that awareness, and as Ndua said, we'll make it louder, but continue with the work of lobbying, because at the end of the day, there's the bills and the laws that have to be drafted and passed. So we'll make the noise, but at the same time also say, okay, this is what we think should be done. Yeah. We have drafted this. Can you assist us push this and work on that?
Going back to the question that Ndu had asked earlier in terms of awareness on all these rights with the people, for the population, what does ICJ do? Maybe working directly with partners to make sure that everybody understands their rights and how then they can go towards agitating to get their rights respected and realized.
I mentioned earlier, we have this paralegal network, and there's a paralegal society. We actually greatly support them, and I didn't probably go into much detail on what we do with them. We have different regions. We have appointed, or rather work with the Paralegal Society. we have worked with them to train them, and we have periodical meetings where we just get to strategize, identify the needs which are there on the grassroots. And through this, because we may not all be everywhere at the same time, these groupings create some sort of awareness on the ground. We assist them with the material and the know-how, the knowledge, and they do break it down now, because in the regions they're able to speak to them in the language they understand. They're able to connect with them on a day-to-day basis in terms of what challenges they face, because you'd find different regions have different concerns. So we take our time to engage them on that. More needs to be done, and of course, at the end of the day, subject to funding, we intend to expand that so that if we can cover the entire country, so that we have an empowered citizen, that will be our joy.
Great.
Yes.
So tonight is when you're holding your Jurist of the Year.
Yes, we have Jurist of the Year awards tonight, and this one will celebrate the jurist who has stood out in terms of promoting human rights and defending the democratic space. Yes.
We look forward to hosting that winner coming in the coming weeks.
Yes.
To hear
Yes.
what they've done. Thank you very
Yes.
much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And come again soon.
Asante.